The stagecoach rattled into Mineral Park, Arizona, on a blistering afternoon in June of 1882, and Violet Owens pressed her gloved hand against the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack right through her ribs. She had left everything behind in Missouri, including a man who would see her dead before he would let her go. And now she was arriving to meet a stranger who had paid her passage west with promises of marriage and a new life. The dust swirled around the wooden buildings like restless ghosts, and Violet clutched the carpetbag that held everything she owned, praying that Quinn Dalton would be the kind of man who kept his word. The driver called out, and the horses slowed, their hooves clopping against the hard-packed earth. Violet smoothed down her traveling dress, dark blue calico that had seen better days, and tucked a strand of auburn hair back under her bonnet. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, carrying secrets that weighed more than any trunk. Her fingers trembled as she gathered her belongings, and when the door swung open, the Arizona heat hit her like a physical blow. A weathered man with kind eyes offered his hand to help her down. "Welcome to Mineral Park, miss. You must be Miss Owens." "Yes," she managed, her voice hoarse from the long journey. "I am looking for Quinn Dalton." "That would be me." The voice came from behind the older man, deep and steady, and Violet turned to see a tall cowboy stepping forward. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of sage. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair that needed cutting, and he wore dusty work clothes that spoke of honest labor. He was not handsome in the polished way that her ex-husband had been, but there was something solid about him, something real. Quinn removed his hat and held it against his chest. "I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," Violet said carefully, studying his face for any sign of cruelty or deception. She had learned to read men, though it had taken her too long and cost her too much. But Quinn's expression was open, almost nervous, and when he smiled it reached his eyes. "I have a wagon waiting," he said. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. It is not much, but it is honest work and good land." He paused, then added more quietly, "I know this is strange for you. I want you to know that you do not have to decide anything right away. You can take your time, and if you find that this arrangement does not suit you, I will help you get wherever you want to go." The kindness in his words nearly undid her. Violet had expected demands, expectations, perhaps even immediate insistence on the marriage. Instead, this cowboy was offering her a choice. She swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you. That is very generous." Quinn loaded her bag into the wagon, and the older man, who introduced himself as Doc Brennan, touched his hat brim in farewell. "Good to have another lady in town, Miss Owens. We could use some civilizing influence around here." The ride to Quinn's ranch passed in awkward silence at first. The land stretched out in all directions, harsh and beautiful, with mountains rising in the distance like purple teeth against the sky. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, and the air smelled of creosote and sun-baked earth. "I should tell you about myself," Quinn said finally, keeping his eyes on the road. "I came out here 4 years ago from Texas. My family lost everything after the war, and I wanted to start fresh. I have been building up the ranch, running cattle mostly. I have 2 hands who work for me, brothers named Carl and Tom Winters. They are good men, a bit rough around the edges but trustworthy. I have a house, nothing fancy, but it has a good roof and a proper stove." "Why did you send for a mail-order bride?" Violet asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since she had first read his advertisement. Quinn's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "Loneliness, I suppose. This is hard country, and it is harder when you have no one to share it with. I'm not good with words or courting, never have been. Figured this was more honest in a way. I lay out what I have to offer. A woman decides if it is enough, and we go from there. What do you want in a wife? The question felt dangerous, but Violet needed to know. Someone real, Quinn said simply. Someone who will not run at the first sign of trouble. Someone who can be a partner, not just a decoration. And someone who wants to be here, who chooses this life, not someone I have to convince or trap. He glanced at her, and his expression was serious. What about you? Why did you answer my advertisement? Violet's throat went dry. She had prepared lies for this moment, stories about wanting adventure or seeking a new start. But something about Quinn's honesty pulled the truth from her. I was running, she said quietly. From a man who called himself my husband but was really my jailer. I needed to disappear, and answering an advertisement from Arizona territory seemed like the best way to do it. Quinn was quiet for a long moment, the wagon wheels creaking. He hurt you? Yes. The word came out as barely a whisper. He will not hurt you here, Quinn said, and there was steel in his voice now. I give you my word on that. Violet wanted to believe him, but she had learned that words were cheap. Still, she nodded and turned her attention back to the landscape, blinking away the tears that threatened to fall. Quinn's ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent. It was modest but well-maintained, with a wooden house that had been painted white at some point, now weathered to a soft gray. There was a barn, a corral with horses, and pastures where cattle grazed. It looked like hope, if hope could be built from timber and nails. Two men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached, wiping their hands on their pants. They were clearly brothers, both lean and sun-worn, one with a thick mustache and the other clean-shaven. Carl, Tom, this is Miss Owens, Quinn said as he helped Violet down from the wagon. She will be staying with us. I expect you to treat her with respect. Yes, sir, they chorused, touching their hat brims. Carl, the one with the mustache, added, Welcome, Miss Owens. It will be nice to have some decent cooking around here. Tom elbowed him. What Carl means is that we are pleased to have you. Despite her exhaustion and fear, Violet found herself smiling. Thank you both. Quinn carried her bag inside, and Violet followed, her heart in her throat. The interior of the house was simple but clean. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and two doors that must lead to bedrooms. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, and everything was surprisingly neat for a household of bachelor cowboys. The bedroom on the right is yours, Quinn said, setting her bag down. I will be in the other one. The door has a lock if that makes you feel safer. Violet stared at him. You are not expecting me to share your bed, Quinn's ears turned red. Not until we are properly married, if that is what you decide. And even then, not until you are ready. I am not that kind of man, Miss Owens. The knot in Violet's chest loosened slightly. Thank you, she said, and meant it with her whole heart. That first week passed in a strange dance of politeness and careful distance. Quinn rose before dawn to work the ranch, and Violet threw herself into making the house a home. She cooked proper meals, scrubbed floors, mended clothes, and tried not to jump at every unexpected sound. The Winters brothers treated her with shy courtesy, and Quinn was unfailingly respectful, never pressing her about marriage or anything else. But at night, alone in her room, Violet lay awake and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind rattled the shutters, and she thought about Marcus. Marcus Pemberton, the banker's son from St. Louis who had courted her with flowers and pretty words, who had seemed like everything a young woman could want. The man who had turned into a monster once the wedding vows were said, who had isolated her from her family, controlled every aspect of her life, and raised his fists when she dared to question him. She had escaped on a night when he had drunk too much and passed out. She had taken what little money she had hidden away and run, knowing that Marcus would never let her go willingly. He had connections, money, and a reputation to protect. A wife who left him would be seen as a scandal, a mark against his pride. Violet knew he would look for her, and the thought kept her awake long after midnight. On the 8th day, Quinn asked if she would like to ride into town with him for supplies. Violet agreed, grateful for a change of scenery and a chance to see more of the community that might become her home. They set out in the wagon in the early morning when the air was still cool, and Quinn pointed out landmarks along the way. "That is the Ramirez place," he said, indicating a small ranch to the south. "Good people. They have been here longer than anyone, and over there those rocks. That is where the old silver mine used to be. Mineral Park was a mining town before the cattle came." Violet listened, storing away every detail. She needed to know this place to understand it if she was going to survive here. Quinn seemed to sense this and kept up a steady stream of information, his voice calm and educational rather than lecturing. The town was busier than it had been when she arrived. Wagons lined the main street, and people called out greetings to each other. Quinn helped Violet down and offered his arm, which she took after a moment's hesitation. They walked to the general store, and Violet was aware of the curious glances from the townspeople. She kept her head high, refusing to show her nervousness. Inside the store, a plump woman with graying hair greeted them warmly. "Quinn Dalton, as I live and breathe, and this must be your intended. I heard you had brought in a bride from back east." "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Violet Owens," Quinn said. "Violet, Mrs. Patterson runs this store with her husband." "Pleased to meet you, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, clasping Violet's hands. "You must come to the church social next month. All the ladies will want to meet you properly." Violet murmured her thanks and let Quinn guide her through the store as they selected supplies. He asked her opinion on everything, from fabric to canned goods, treating her choices with respect. They were at the counter, waiting for Mr. Patterson to tally up their order when the door opened and a man in a suit walked in. He was the territorial marshal, Violet realized, seeing the badge pinned to his vest. He carried a stack of papers in his hand and immediately began tacking them to the wall near the door. Wanted posters, offering rewards for outlaws and criminals. Violet's blood turned to ice when she saw the third poster he put up. It was a drawing of her face, not perfect but close enough, and beneath it read, "Reward for information leading to the whereabouts of Violet Pemberton. Wanted for theft and abandonment of marriage. Contact Marcus Pemberton, St. Louis, Missouri." The world tilted sideways. Violet's vision went dark at the edges, and she felt Quinn's hand steady her elbow. She could not breathe, could not think. Marcus had done it. He had put out a bounty on her, twisted the story to make her the criminal. Theft, he had called it, when all she had taken was her own clothing and the small amount of money from her mother's inheritance that he had not yet found. Abandonment of marriage, as if their vows had been sacred instead of a trap. "Violet," Quinn's voice came from far away. "Are you all right?" She could not answer. The marshal was still talking to Mr. Patterson, laughing about something. He had not noticed her reaction, had not connected the woman in the poster to the woman standing 10 feet away. But it was only a matter of time. Quinn followed her gaze to the poster, and she felt him go still beside her. His hand tightened on her arm, not painfully but protectively. Then he did something that Violet would remember for the rest of her life. He walked calmly to the wall, pulled the poster down with one smooth motion, and crossed to the stove that heated the store. He lifted the iron door and threw the poster into the flames, watching it curl and blacken and turn to ash. The marshal turned, frowning. "Hey now, what are you doing?" "That poster was a lie," Quinn said, his voice level but hard as granite. "The woman it describes is not a criminal. She is a victim who had the courage to escape, and no one in this town is going to help some eastern bastard hunt her down." The store went silent. Mr. Patterson's mouth hung open, and Mrs. Patterson gripped the counter, her eyes wide. The marshal's face reddened, and he stepped toward Quinn. "That is official business, Dalton. You cannot just destroy wanted posters." "I just did," Quinn said. "And if you put up another one, I will burn that too. This woman is under my protection now, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." The marshal looked from Quinn to Violet, and she saw the moment he recognized her from the drawing. His hand moved toward his gun, and Violet's heart stopped. But Quinn moved faster, stepping between them, his own hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Do not," Quinn said quietly. "This is not a legal matter, Marshal. There is no crime here except the one committed against her by a man who thinks he owns her. And in this territory, a woman has the right to leave a bad situation. That is not for you to decide," the marshal said, but his hand had moved away from his gun. The law back east does not hold much water out here," Quinn interrupted. "And you know as well as I do that this is a personal grudge dressed up as justice. How much is he offering? $50? $100? Is that what a woman's safety is worth to you?" The marshal's face went through several shades of red and purple. The store was packed now, other customers having entered during the confrontation, and all eyes were on the scene. Violet saw Mrs. Patterson whisper something to her husband, her expression fierce. Finally, Mrs. Patterson herself spoke up. "Quinn is right, Marshal Donovan. We all know what this is. And Mineral Park does not turn over women to abusers, no matter what some fancy city man claims. If you want to keep the respect of this town, you will let this matter drop." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Marshal Donovan looked around, his jaw working, and Violet could see him calculating the cost of pushing this further. Finally, he held up his hands. "Fine. I will tell anyone who asks that the woman in the poster was never seen in these parts. But Dalton, if this comes back on me, it will not," Quinn said firmly. "You have my word." The marshal nodded curtly and left the store, taking his remaining posters with him. The tension broke like a snapped string, and people began talking all at once. Mrs. Patterson came around the counter and wrapped Violet in a fierce hug. "You poor dear," she said. "Do not worry. We take care of our own here, and you are one of us now." Violet could not speak past the lump in her throat. Tears streamed down her face, and she was not even embarrassed. Quinn's hand was still on her arm, warm and solid, and when she looked up at him, the expression in his eyes made her heart stutter. "Let's go home," he said gently. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Violet kept stealing glances at Quinn, trying to understand what had just happened. He had stood up for her without hesitation, had put his own reputation and safety on the line to protect her. He had burned the poster, literally erased Marcus's attempt to find her, and he had done it as if there had been no other choice. When they reached the ranch, Quinn helped her down from the wagon and then stood there, holding her hand for a moment longer than necessary. "I need you to know something," he said. "I meant what I said back there. You are under my protection. No one is going to hurt you or take you anywhere you do not want to go, not while I am breathing." "Why?" Violet asked, her voice breaking. "You barely know me. Why would you risk so much?" Quinn was quiet for a long moment, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because in the past week I have come to care about you, maybe more than I should given the circumstances, but I see you, Violet. I see how hard you are trying, how brave you are even though you are scared. I see the way you jump at loud noises and how you never quite relax, always watching the door. I know what it is like to live with fear, and I will be damned if I let any man make you feel that way again." The tears came harder now, and Violet let them fall. Quinn pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and letting herself feel safe for the first time in years. He smelled like leather and hay and sunshine, and his heart beat steady beneath her ear. "I am so tired of being afraid," she whispered. "Then stop," Quinn said into her hair. "Stay here. Marry me not because you have to, but because you want to. Build a life with me. I cannot promise it will be easy, but I can promise I will never raise a hand to you. I will never control you or diminish you. I will be your partner, your equal, and I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust." Violet pulled back enough to look up at him. His face was open, vulnerable, and she saw the truth written there. This was a man who kept his promises. This was a man she could build a future with. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Quinn's smile was like the sun coming up over the mountains. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and kissed her forehead. "We will do it right," he said. "I will court you properly, give you time to be sure. But thank you, Violet. You have no idea what this means to me." Over the following weeks, Quinn kept his word. He courted Violet with a patience and sweetness that made her fall more in love with him every day. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, their petals bright against the harsh landscape. He taught her to ride, his hands careful as he helped her mount and his voice encouraging as she found her balance. They took long walks in the evening, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories. Violet told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had died of fever when she was 18, leaving her alone and vulnerable. She told him about Marcus, about how he had seemed charming at first and how slowly she had realized she was trapped. She told him about the night she had fled, riding the train west with her heart in her throat, certain any moment someone would recognize her and drag her back. Quinn listened to it all without judgment, his hand holding hers, his anger on her behalf barely contained but never directed at her. And in turn, he told her about Texas, about a family torn apart by war and poverty. He told her about his father, who had drunk himself to death after losing their land, and his mother, who had remarried a man Quinn could not stand. He told her about coming west with nothing but a horse and a dream, about working himself nearly to death to build something that was his own. "I understand running," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. "I understand wanting to start over, to be someone new in a place where no one knows your shame. That is what I did, and it saved my life. I want this place to save yours too." "It already has," Violet said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You already have." They were married in early August by the circuit preacher who came through Mineral Park once a month. The ceremony was held in the small church with Mrs. Patterson and Doc Brennan standing as witnesses, and half the town in attendance. Violet wore a new dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar, and Quinn wore his best suit, his hair finally trimmed and his face freshly shaved. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed Violet with a tenderness that made her weep. This was nothing like her first wedding, which had been a grand affair filled with Marcus's friends and family, where she had felt like a prize being displayed. This was intimate and real, a promise made between two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their pasts. The townspeople threw a celebration at the church, with food and music and dancing that lasted until well after dark. Carl and Tom Winters got cheerfully drunk and sang bawdy songs that made Mrs. Patterson scold them, and Doc Brennan gave a toast about new beginnings that brought tears to more than one eye. Violet danced with Quinn under the stars, his arms strong around her, and felt something she had never expected to feel again: joy. When they finally returned to the ranch, Quinn carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing. He set her down gently in the main room, and suddenly the laughter faded, replaced by a charged tension. Violet's pulse quickened, but it was not fear that made her heart race now. It was anticipation. "Are you sure?" Quinn asked, his voice rough. "We can wait." "I told you I will not push." Violet reached up and placed her finger against his lips. "I am sure," she said. "I want this. I want you." Quinn's eyes darkened, and he kissed her properly, then deeply, his hands tangling in her hair. Violet kissed him back with everything she had, pouring years of loneliness and fear into the embrace, and finding them transformed into passion and hope. He lifted her and carried her to the bedroom, and when he laid her on the bed, his touch was reverent. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, tracing the line of her jaw. "I will spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve you." "You already do," Violet whispered and drew him down to her. They loved each other through the night, learning the map of each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and what brought gasps. Quinn was patient and attentive, constantly asking if she was all right, if he was hurting her, his care a balm to old wounds. And when Violet finally fell asleep in his arms, sated and safe, she knew that she had finally found home. The months that followed were the happiest of Violet's life. She threw herself into ranch life, learning to tend the chickens they acquired and planting a vegetable garden near the house. She baked bread and cooked meals that made even the taciturn Winters brothers smile, and she learned the rhythms of the seasons in this harsh, beautiful land. Quinn was everything he had promised to be and more. He consulted her on every decision about the ranch, valued her opinions, and never once dismissed her ideas. When she suggested they try raising some sheep in addition to cattle, he listened and agreed to buy a small starter flock. When she wanted to learn to shoot so she could protect herself if needed, he taught her patiently, standing behind her and guiding her aim until she could hit a target more often than not. They were partners in every sense of the word, working side by side during the day and coming together at night in a tangle of limbs and whispered endearments. Violet blossomed under Quinn's love, her fear slowly melting away like snow in the desert sun. She laughed more, smiled more, and began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her past could not reach her here. But the past has a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. It was a cold morning in late November when the rider appeared on the horizon. Quinn was out checking the fence line in the north pasture, and Violet was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud approaching. Something about the purposeful way the horse was moving made her stomach clench. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran for the house, her pulse hammering. Carl Winters was in the barn, and she called out to him as she passed. "Someone is coming. Get Tom and find Quinn. Hurry." Carl took one look at her face and ran for his horse without question. Violet ducked into the house and went straight for the rifle Quinn had taught her to shoot. Her hands were shaking so badly, she nearly dropped it twice, but she managed to load it and position herself near the window where she could see the approaching rider. The man who dismounted in the yard was not Marcus, which was both a relief and a new worry. He was tall and lean, with cold eyes and a gun slung low on his hip in the manner of a man who knew how to use it. A bounty hunter, Violet thought with sick certainty. Marcus had sent a bounty hunter. The man knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that made Violet flinch. She did not answer, barely dared to breathe. After a moment the man called out, "Mrs. Pemberton, I know you are in there, I just want to talk." "I am not Mrs. Pemberton anymore," Violet called back, trying to keep her voice steady, "and I have nothing to say to you." "Your husband is very worried about you," the man said, his tone falsely pleasant. "He just wants you to come home where you belong. If you come peacefully, there will not be any trouble." "I am home," Violet said, "and my husband is on his way here right now. I suggest you leave before he arrives." The man laughed, a sound like gravel. "That cowboy. I heard about him, how he thinks he is some kind of hero. But he is just one man, and I am very good at my job. Come on out, Mrs. Pemberton. Do not make this harder than it has to be." Violet's finger tightened on the trigger. She was not a killer, but she would defend herself if she had to. Before she could respond, the thunder of hoofbeats filled the air. Quinn appeared over the rise, riding hard with Carl and Tom right behind him. He vaulted off his horse before it had even fully stopped and put himself between the bounty hunter and the house. "You are trespassing," Quinn said, his voice deadly calm. "Get back on your horse and ride out of here." The bounty hunter turned, sizing Quinn up. "You must be Dalton." "I am here for the woman. She is wanted back in Missouri, and I have been paid good money to bring her back. You can save yourself some trouble and hand her over, or we can do this the hard way." "She is not going anywhere," Quinn said. "And you have got about 10 seconds to get off my property before I shoot you for trespassing." The bounty hunter's hand moved toward his gun, and everything happened very fast. Tom Winters, who had circled around, suddenly appeared behind the man and pressed the barrel of his rifle against his back. "I would not do that if I was you, mister." The bounty hunter froze, his eyes narrowing. "There are laws," he said. "You cannot just keep a man from doing his job." "Your job is based on lies," Quinn said. "That woman is my wife, legally married under the laws of Arizona territory. She is not your prey, and she is not going back to a man who abused her. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to get on your horse. You are going to ride back to St. Louis, and you are going to tell Marcus Pemberton that his ex-wife is dead. Died of fever or a rattlesnake bite, or whatever story makes him leave her alone. Because if he sends anyone else out here, if I see another bounty hunter or another wanted poster, I will come to St. Louis myself and have a conversation with Mr. Pemberton that he will not enjoy." The bounty hunter looked at the 3 men surrounding him, at the rifle pressed to his back and the determination on their faces. Slowly he raised his hands. "All right," he said. "All right. But you are making a mistake. Pemberton is not the kind of man to give up easily." "Neither am I," Quinn said. "Now get." Tom stepped back, keeping his rifle trained on the man, and the bounty hunter mounted his horse with deliberate slowness. He looked at the house, as if trying to memorize Violet's location, and then he kicked his horse into a trot and disappeared down the road. Quinn waited until the rider was out of sight, then turned and ran for the house. Violet met him at the door, the rifle still in her hands, tears streaming down her face. He took the gun from her and set it aside, then pulled her into his arms. "It is all right," he murmured into her hair. "You are safe. I have got you." "He found me," Violet sobbed. "Marcus found me." "He is never going to stop, Quinn. He will keep sending people until—" "No," Quinn said firmly, pulling back to look at her. "No, he will not. Because I meant what I said. If he does not leave you alone, I will go to St. Louis and I will end this. One way or another, Violet, you are free. I promise you that." Violet wanted to believe him, but fear had its hooks in her deep. That night she could not sleep, starting at every sound. Quinn held her close, his body a shield between her and the door, but even his warmth could not chase away the chill of terror. In the morning, Quinn called a meeting with Carl and Tom. "I need you two to keep watch," he said. "Rotating shifts day and night. If anyone unfamiliar comes within a mile of this place, I want to know about it." "You think he will send more?" Carl asked. "I think we cannot afford to assume he will not," Quinn said. and I need to make sure Violet is protected while I am working." "We will keep her safe, boss," Tom promised. "You have our word." The next few weeks were tense. Violet tried to maintain her routine, but she was constantly looking over her shoulder, constantly listening for the sound of approaching horses. Quinn stayed close when he could, and when he had to be out on the range, Carl or Tom was always nearby. The easy joy of their early marriage was strained by the shadow of Marcus's pursuit, and Violet hated it. It was mid-December when Doc Brennan rode out to the ranch with news. Quinn and Violet met him on the porch, and the doctor's expression was grave. "I thought you should know," he said without preamble. The telegraph office received a message addressed to the marshal. It was from St. Louis, asking if there had been any sightings of a woman matching Violet's description. The marshal sent back a reply saying no such woman had been seen in Mineral Park or the surrounding area. Relief flooded through Violet, but Quinn's expression remained wary. "Did the marshal say anything else?" "He came to see me after," Doc Brennan said. "Asked me to pass along a message. He said that as far as he is concerned, this matter is closed. But he also said that if any more bounty hunters show up, he cannot guarantee they will all be as easy to run off as the first one." Quinn nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you for letting us know, Doc." After Doc Brennan left, Violet turned to Quinn, her heart heavy. "This is never going to end, is it? Marcus is never going to stop looking for me." Quinn took her hands, his expression determined. "Then I will make him stop." "What do you mean?" "I mean I am going to St. Louis," Quinn said. "I am going to find Marcus Pemberton, and I am going to convince him to leave you alone, permanently." Fear shot through Violet like lightning. "No, Quinn, you cannot. He is dangerous, he has connections, he could have you arrested or worse. And you are my wife," Quinn said simply. "I will not sit here and watch you live in fear. I will not let that bastard steal your peace. I am going, Violet. I have to." Violet knew there was no point in arguing. She could see the resolution in Quinn's eyes, the same steel that had made him burn the wanted poster and stand up to the bounty hunter. "Then I am coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not. Quinn, Violet, if something goes wrong, I need to know you are safe here. I need to know that if the worst happens, you have the ranch and Carl and Tom to protect you." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away the tear that had escaped. "Please, let me do this for you." Violet closed her eyes, torn between love and terror. Finally, she nodded. "Promise me you will come back." "I promise," Quinn said and kissed her softly. "I will always come back to you." Quinn left 2 days later, taking enough money for the train fare and a revolver he wore openly. Violet stood on the porch and watched him ride toward town, her heart breaking with every step his horse took. Carl and Tom tried to reassure her, but their words rang hollow. She had finally found happiness, and now it was riding away from her on a borrowed horse. The days that followed were the longest of Violet's life. She threw herself into work, cleaning the house until it gleamed, baking bread she had no appetite for, mending clothes until her fingers ached. At night she lay alone in the bed. She shared with Quinn and stared at the ceiling, praying to a God she was not sure she believed in to bring him back safely. Quinn had been gone for nearly 3 weeks when the telegram arrived. Tom rode into town to pick up supplies and returned with a thin envelope that made Violet's hands shake. She tore it open with trembling fingers and read the brief message, "Matter resolved. Coming home." Q. Violet read it 3 times, trying to parse the meaning from those 5 words. Matter resolved. What did that mean? Had Quinn talked to Marcus, threatened him, killed him? She wanted details desperately but would have to wait for Quinn to return to get them. He arrived 4 days later, riding into the yard just as the sun was setting. Violet ran from the house and threw herself into his arms before he had even fully dismounted. He caught her, holding her tight, and she felt the tension drain from her body. He was home. He was safe. "Tell me," she said when they were alone inside, seated at the kitchen table with coffee neither of them was drinking. "Tell me everything." Quinn scrubbed a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, older somehow, as if the trip had aged him. "I went to St. Louis," he said. "Found Marcus Pemberton at his bank. He is exactly the kind of man I expected, polished, arrogant, convinced that he is untouchable." "What did you do?" "I told him that you were never coming back, that you were my wife now and under my protection. He laughed at me, said he had the law on his side, and that eventually you would be returned to him." Quinn's jaw tightened. "So I showed him that I was not just some uneducated cowboy. I went to a lawyer, a good one, and I learned that in Arizona territory you have the right to divorce on the grounds of cruelty. I filed the papers, had them sent to Missouri. Your marriage to Marcus Pemberton is legally over." Violet stared at him, hardly daring to believe. "But how?" "He would never agree to that." "He did not have a choice," Quinn said. "The lawyer explained that with testimony from you and corroboration from people in Mineral Park who witnessed your fear and the circumstances of your arrival, the divorce would go through whether Marcus contested it or not. And then I explained to Marcus that if he continued to harass you, I would make sure everyone in St. Louis knew exactly what kind of man he was. I would take out advertisements in the newspapers. I would talk to his business associates. I would stand on the steps of his bank and tell every person who walked by that he was a wife-beater who had driven his spouse to flee across the country." "You did not," Violet breathed. "I did," Quinn said. "And I meant every word. I told him that his reputation, his precious standing in society, would be destroyed if he did not leave you alone. That was the only language he understood, not right or wrong, not laws or morality, but social consequences." He reached across the table and took her hand. "It worked, Violet. He agreed to leave you alone. He signed papers acknowledging the divorce and renouncing any claim on you. It is over." Violet could not speak. The words caught in her throat, tangled up with too many emotions to name. Relief, gratitude, love, joy, they all crashed over her like a wave. She stood and moved around the table, and Quinn rose to meet her. She kissed him with everything she had, trying to pour years of fear and weeks of worry into the embrace, trying to show him what his courage meant to her. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for giving me my life back." "You gave me mine first," Quinn said, pulling her close. "Now we can start living it together, really living it without looking over our shoulders." That night they made love with a desperate intensity, reclaiming each other after the separation, celebrating the freedom they had won. And afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Violet finally felt the last knot of fear unravel. She was truly free. She was truly home. The winter passed into spring, and life at the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. Violet's garden flourished, and the sheep she had wanted proved to be a good addition to their livestock. Quinn taught her more about ranching, and she proved to have a natural talent for it. They worked together, laughed together, and loved each other with an intensity that never seemed to fade. In April, Violet realized she had missed her monthly cycle. Then she missed the next one. The symptoms followed: nausea in the mornings, exhaustion, a tenderness in her breasts. She knew before Doc Brennan confirmed it that she was carrying Quinn's child. When she told him, Quinn's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face went through shock, disbelief, and then pure joy in the space of 3 seconds. He lifted her and spun her around, laughing, then immediately set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you all right? Is everything all right? Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" Violet laughed at his panic, at the sudden protective intensity in his eyes. "I am fine," she assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Quinn. I am not fragile." "You are carrying my child," Quinn said, his voice full of wonder. "Our child. Violet, we are going to be a family." "We already are a family," Violet said softly. "But yes, we are going to add to it." Quinn was impossibly attentive during her pregnancy, fussing over her constantly. He insisted she rest more, work less, and eat properly. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk, and Violet sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with every stitch. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Violet's body ached constantly. But every time she felt the baby move inside her, every time she saw Quinn's hand rest reverently on her swollen belly, she knew it was worth it. This child was proof that they had survived, that they had built something good and lasting from the ashes of their old lives. On a chilly evening in late November, almost exactly a year after the bounty hunter had come to their door, Violet's labor began. Quinn rode for Doc Brennan while Mrs. Patterson and 2 other women from town came to help. The labor was long and painful, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Violet thought she might die from the pain, but Mrs. Patterson held her hand and told her to breathe, to push, to keep going. And finally, as the sun rose over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a baby's cry filled the air. Violet collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond words, and Doc Brennan placed a squirming, red-faced infant in her arms. "It is a boy," he said, smiling. "A healthy, strong boy." Violet looked down at her son, at the tiny perfect features and the shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. Quinn appeared in the doorway, his face pale and anxious, and when he saw the baby he made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Come meet your son," Violet said, her voice hoarse. Quinn approached as if walking on holy ground. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out one finger to touch the baby's hand. The infant's tiny fingers wrapped around Quinn's much larger one, and Quinn's eyes filled with tears. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father. And I promise you, I am going to spend every day making sure you know you are loved and safe and wanted." They named him James, after Quinn's brother who had died in the war. James Dalton, born into love and hope and possibility. Violet nursed him while Quinn hovered nearby, ready to help with anything she needed. Carl and Tom came by to meet the baby, suddenly awkward and soft-spoken in the presence of something so small and precious. The months after James's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Violet had never known it was possible to feel so much love for another human being. Every milestone, the first smile, the first time James rolled over, the first babbling sounds felt like a miracle. And watching Quinn with their son was a revelation. He was patient and gentle, singing softly to James when he would not sleep, walking the floor with him at night so Violet could rest. "You are a good father," Violet told him one evening, watching as Quinn played with James on the living room floor. "I am trying to be," Quinn said, looking up at her with those sage-colored eyes that still made her heart skip. "I want to be everything my father was not. I want James to grow up knowing he is loved, knowing that his home is a safe place." "He will," Violet said softly, "because he has you. Because he has us." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Word had spread about Quinn's stand against Marcus Pemberton, and the story had taken on a legendary quality in the retelling. People spoke of the cowboy who had burned the bounty poster and traveled across the country to free his wife from her past. It earned them respect throughout the territory, and more than a few young cowboys came seeking work, wanting to be part of something honorable. Quinn hired carefully, building a crew of men who shared his values. The ranch expanded, the house was added onto, and the herd grew larger. But no matter how successful they became, Quinn never forgot where they had started. He remained humble and hardworking, up before dawn and never asking his men to do anything he would not do himself. When James was 3, Violet found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued working almost until her due date, and when her labor began on a warm spring afternoon, she was helping Quinn mend fence. "I think it is time," she said calmly, setting down her tools. Quinn's eyes went wide. "Time? As in the baby is coming time?" "Yes. Right now." "Within the next few hours, I would imagine." Quinn proceeded to panic in exactly the same way he had with James, which made Violet laugh even through the contractions. This birth went faster than the first, and by early evening Violet was holding a tiny girl with auburn hair and blue eyes. "She looks like you," Quinn said, his voice choked with emotion. "She has your chin," Violet countered, tracing the baby's face with one finger. They named her Sarah, and James was initially confused by but quickly enamored with his baby sister. He would sit next to Violet while she nursed and tell Sarah long, rambling stories that made no sense but were delivered with complete seriousness. Quinn took 1,000 mental pictures of his family, hoarding the memories like treasure. The years flowed by like water. James grew tall and serious, with his father's quiet strength. Sarah was wild and joyful, always covered in dirt from exploring the ranch. 2 more children followed, another boy they named Daniel, and finally a girl they called Grace. The house was always full of noise and laughter, and the chaos of a large family. Quinn and Violet grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their disagreements. Of course, passionate debates about how to run the ranch, how to discipline the children, whether to expand into horses or stick with cattle. But they always talked it through, always respected each other's opinions, always remembered what they had survived to build this life together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Violet on a rare trip away from the ranch. They left the children in the capable hands of Carl and Tom, who were now part of the family in all but name, and rode to a spot in the desert that Quinn had discovered years ago. It was a hidden canyon with a spring, where wildflowers grew in impossible profusion, and the walls glowed red in the sunset. "I have been wanting to bring you here for years," Quinn said as they dismounted. "But there was never time, never a moment when we could both step away." "It is beautiful," Violet breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Quinn unpacked the supplies he had brought: a blanket, food, a bottle of wine they had been saving. They sat together as the sun went down, painting the sky in shades of fire, and talked about everything and nothing. About the children and the ranch, about their hopes for the future, about how strange and wonderful it was that a wanted poster had led them to each other. "You ever regret it?" Quinn asked quietly. "Answering my advertisement, coming all this way?" Violet turned to look at him, at this man who had saved her life in every way that mattered. His hair was threaded with silver now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was still the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Not for a single second," she said. "You gave me everything, Quinn. Freedom, love, a family, a home. You gave me myself back. How could I ever regret that?" Quinn kissed her then, deep and slow, and they made love under the stars as if they were young again, as if the weight of 20 years and 4 children had not touched them. And afterward, lying wrapped in the blanket with Quinn's arm around her, and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Violet thought about the girl she had been when she stepped off that stagecoach in Mineral Park. She had been so afraid, so certain that she would never be safe or happy again. She had believed that Marcus had broken something essential in her, that she would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. But Quinn had proved her wrong. He had burned the poster, burned away her past, and given her a future brighter than anything she had dared to dream. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Quinn murmured back. "Always have, always will." They grew old together on that ranch in Arizona, watching their children grow up and have children of their own. James took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving to have his father's head for business and his mother's compassion. Sarah married a young rancher from the neighboring property, uniting two of the largest spreads in the territory. Daniel became a teacher, moving to Tucson but visiting often. And Grace, their youngest, proved to have a gift with horses that made her famous throughout the territory. Quinn and Violet became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They sat on the porch in rocking chairs Quinn had built, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. Their hands were gnarled now, their steps slower, but the love between them had never dimmed. On a warm evening in early summer, when Violet was 71 and Quinn was 75, they sat together watching another Arizona sunset. The house was full of family, children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday dinner, the sound of voices and laughter drifting through the open windows. "We did all right, did we not?" Quinn said, his hand finding Violet's. "We did better than all right," Violet said. "We built something beautiful." "You are the beautiful thing," Quinn said, and even after all these years the words made her blush. That night, Quinn died peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding Violet's. The doctor said it was his heart, that it had simply worn out after 75 years of hard work and harder love. The funeral was enormous, people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Violet grieved deeply, the loss of her partner leaving a hole in her life that could never be filled. But she did not break. Quinn had taught her how to be strong, how to endure, how to find joy even in sorrow. She lived another 3 years, long enough to see her youngest great-grandchild born, long enough to tell her story to anyone who would listen. She told them about being a mail-order bride, about the wanted poster and the cowboy who had burned it without hesitation. She told them about riding across the desert to build a new life, about learning to love a man who had shown her what real love looked like. She told them about the ranch and the children and the 53 years she had spent married to the best man she had ever known. And when Violet died on a cool autumn morning, surrounded by family, her last words were Quinn's name. They buried her next to him, under the shade of a cottonwood tree they had planted together decades ago. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, but the story they represented was epic, a love that had conquered fear, distance, and the ghosts of the past. The ranch continued through the generations, the Dalton name becoming synonymous with integrity and hard work. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could see 2 figures on the porch of the old house, a tall man and a woman with auburn hair, sitting side by side and watching the sunset over the land they had tamed together. The story of Quinn and Violet became legend in Mineral Park, and beyond the tale of the mail-order bride with a bounty on her head, and the cowboy who had loved her enough to burn away her past. It was told around campfires and passed down through families, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to love someone, to stand up for them, to fight for their freedom even when the whole world says you should not. And if the story grew in the telling, if the details became embellished over time, well, that was all right. Because at its core, the truth remained. Two broken people had found each other in the Wild West and built something extraordinary. They had created a family, a legacy, and a love story that would echo through generations. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the fear or the running or the wanted posters. Not the bounty hunters or the threats or the long journey across a hostile country. What mattered was that they had found each other, that they had chosen each other, and that they had spent their lives proving that love could triumph over anything. The ranch still stands today, worked by the descendants of Quinn and Violet Dalton. And if you visit on the right kind of evening, when the light is golden and the air smells of sage and possibility, you might understand why two people fell in love there. You might feel the echo of a story that began with fear and ended with joy. A story about burning away the past and building a future with your own two hands. That is the power of love in the Wild West, where the land was hard but the people were harder, where survival required strength but thriving required hope. Quinn and Violet had both strength enough to face down anyone who threatened them, hope enough to believe in second chances. And together, they had created something that would outlast them both. A family, a home, and a love story for the ages. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of courage. Stepping off a stagecoach in an unfamiliar town. Answering an advertisement from a stranger. Tearing down a wanted poster and burning it, choosing love over fear. These small moments of bravery can change the course of a life, can transform running into standing, fear into strength, loneliness into love. And so the story of Quinn and Violet Dalton lives on, a testament to the enduring power of love and the unshakable strength of two people who refuse to let their pasts define their future. They had both been broken by life, but they had healed each other. They had both been alone, but they had found family. They had both been running, but they had finally found a place to stand and fight and love in the end. That was their legacy, not just the ranch or the children or the decades of partnership, but the proof that love could survive anything. That two people who met under the most unlikely circumstances could build a life together that was worth every risk, every hardship, every moment of doubt. That sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on someone, from choosing to believe in second chances and new beginnings. The Wild West was full of stories, tales of outlaws and lawmen, of gold rushes and gunfights, of survival against impossible odds. But among all those stories, the tale of Quinn and Violet Dalton stands out. Not because it was the most dramatic or the most tragic, but because it was the most hopeful. Because it proved that even in the harshest landscape, even in the most dangerous times, love could take root and flourish. And that, in the end, is a story worth telling. A story worth remembering. A story that reminds us all that it is never too late to start over, never too late to find love, never too late to become the person we were always meant to be. Quinn and Violet had both been given second chances by life, and they had seized them with both hands. They had built something beautiful from the ruins of their old lives, and that beauty had echoed down through generations. So when you think of the Wild West, think of more than just the violence and the danger. Think of the love stories, too. Think of the mail-order bride who stepped off a stagecoach with her heart in her throat and found a home. Think of the cowboy who burned a wanted poster and burned away a woman's past with it. Think of the family they built and the legacy they left. Think of Quinn and Violet Dalton, and remember that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that almost never happened. the ones that required courage and faith and a willingness to believe in something better. The ones that remind us that it is always worth fighting for love, always worth taking a chance on hope, always worth choosing to build rather than destroy. Their story began with fear and running, with wanted posters and bounty hunters, with two people who had every reason not to trust anyone. But it ended with love and family, with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with a ranch that stood as proof that two people could overcome anything if they faced it together. And so the legend continues, passed down through the generations, a reminder of what is possible when two people choose each other, when they decide that love is worth fighting for, when they burn away the past and step boldly into the future. The story of Quinn and Violet Dalton, the mail-order bride and the cowboy who loved her, the woman with a bounty and the man who tore down the poster and set her free. That is a story that will never die, as long as there are people who believe in love, who understand the power of second chances, who know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone with your broken heart and let them help you put it back together. Quinn and Violet had done that for each other, and in doing so, they had created something immortal, a love that transcended time, a family that would endure, and a story that would be told around campfires and dinner tables for generations to come. And if you listen closely on quiet Arizona evenings, if you stand on the land they loved and worked and defended, you might still feel their presence. Not as ghosts, but as something more, as proof that love can conquer fear, that courage can overcome the past, and that two people who were meant to find each other will, no matter how far they have to travel or how many obstacles stand in their way. That is the legacy of Quinn and Violet Dalton. That is the power of their story. And that is why, more than a century after they lived and loved and died, people still tell their tale: the mail-order bride with a bounty, and the cowboy who burned the poster and gave her back her life.